There is a wide gap between scientific knowledge and public opinion about the consequences of catastrophe. The indirect damage from the catastrophe with its social, psychological and socio-economic consequences is much greater than the direct damage from the effects of Chernobyl radiation. Delusions 1. Chernobyl had devastating effects on the health of tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands. According to the Russian National Radio-Epidemiological Register, NRER, radiation sickness was diagnosed in 134 people in the 4th unit in the first 24 hours after the explosion. Of these, 28 died within months of the disaster, 27 in Russia, and another 20 died from various causes over the next 20 years. Over the past 30 years, NRER has identified 122 cases of his leukemia among Chernobyl decontamination workers. 37 of them can be attributed to radiation exposure. However, no increased incidence of other neoplastic diseases was found among cleaning workers compared with other populations. From 1986 to 2011, of the 195,000 Russian cleaners on the NRER list, 40,000 died from a variety of causes, with an overall mortality rate no higher than the Russian average. According to NRER statistics available at the end of 2015, 99 of 993 cases of thyroid cancer in children and adolescents, at the time of the disaster, were probably exposure-related. No other effects on the population have been identified, which defies all widespread illusions and stereotypes about the extent of the radiation impact of the accident on people's health. The same conclusion was confirmed 30 years after the disaster. Delusion 2. Genetic consequences of Chernobyl for humanity are appalling. Raphael Aratayunian says 60 years of research around the world has produced no evidence of any genetic defects in descendants resulting from their parents' exposure to radiation. This conclusion is confirmed by the results of continuous monitoring of the Hiroshima and Nagasaki atomic bomb victims and the next generation. No genetic deviations from national average statistics were found. 20 years after the Chernobyl accident, the International Commission on Radiological Protection reduced the value of hypothetical risk by a factor of 10 in his 2007 recommendations. Delusion 3. The Chernobyl disaster hit nature far harder than humans. Chernobyl released unprecedented amounts of radionuclides into the atmosphere. For this reason, it is considered the worst man-made disaster in human history. Radiation levels have returned to natural background levels almost everywhere except in the most heavily contaminated areas. The effects on flora and fauna were felt only in the immediate vicinity of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant within the exclusion zone. The environment has now fully recovered and is beginning to thrive as human impacts are eased. Delusion 4. The resettlement of residents from the town of Pripyat and the adjoining areas was poorly organized. The evacuation of Pripyat, which had 50,000 inhabitants at the time, was swift and timely, says Aratayunian. The regulations at the time only required evacuation from a dose of 750 millisieverts, but the decision to evacuate was made when the predicted level was still below 250 millisieverts. Which quite agrees with today's understanding of criteria for urgent evacuation. Aratayunian says that all claims that people were severely exposed to radiation during the evacuation are untrue. Delusion 5. The authorities concealed the truth from the population and the public from the very first minutes of the Chernobyl disaster while knowing well enough what was going on. Aratayunian believes that everything was much more complicated. Authorities withheld some information, but most importantly, it turned out that the system itself could not assess the situation quickly and accurately. There was no chance of gathering information on radiation levels in the vast areas afflicted by the fallout. If such a system were in place at this time, it would prevent people from consuming locally grown and manufactured foods and prevent long-distance effects. Initially, authorities did not know what had happened and what the real situation was. On the other, all monitoring facilities around nuclear power plants are equipped with computerized systems to monitor the radiation situation, and even authorities and individuals can monitor the radiation exposure situation of other nuclear companies. Delusion 6. Nuclear power as such is to blame because it cannot be controlled. First of all, Aratayunian points out that in a series of tests and experiments Chernobyl personnel violated all instructions and regulations. This explains why years have been spent improving safety systems that incorporate the so-called human factor rather than improving the safety system itself. Secondly, the decision to hand over the nuclear power plant to the USSR Ministry of Energy was a mistake. Virtually all the basics of safety culture in the nuclear industry have been ignored. Department of Energy personnel were not adequately trained to operate a nuclear power plant. Today, NPP staff strictly follow internationally recognized procedures and documents in all their actions. After the 3 Mile Island accident in Pennsylvania in 1979, considered the worst prior to 1986, and the Chernobyl accident, all safety requirements have changed worldwide, fundamentally revised. All releases and dumping of radioactive material associated with the operation of nuclear power plants are within strictly defined limits. They are set at levels 50% to 60% below those that have been found harmful to human health, let alone the environment.